At one point, I thought about proposing a series to the so-called History Channel, Nazi UFOs over Alaska, and based on a true comic I read. Aged 15, or was it a penthouse? Anyway, then I thought the project probably wouldn't float, given my pitch hadn't included the magical dose of television alchemy over fact. Gold. Even bedroom, well, technically a study creator like me knows gold is irresistible, particularly when there's a heap of it, which someone has gone to the trouble of digging out of the ground and just awaits you to simply discover it. The history of the stunning west coast of the South Island was intrinsically linked to mineral resources, farming and forestry of native timber until about 2 decades ago. Now it's linked to renewable resources, using the term linked in the same frame as Siamese twins who don't want to be conjoined. An example of one of those is the never-ending streams of foreign tourists who drive on the wrong side of the road. Back when only men could go into men's toilets, when gold was top of the economic totem, blokes went out and worked hard to locate it, drank just beer or whiskey, not girly premixes, particularly those hardy souls in Central Otago and on the west coast. Most miners, it's fair to say, didn't make a fortune, barely scraped a living. They aimed high and had big dreams, often chased them long after it was sensible to move on. South Westland has the lowest population density in New Zealand, even taking Fiordland National Park into account. When you travel south of Haast, you'll reach here, in Jackson Bay, the end of the road. Southward, another hop, skip and a jump, are the Cascades. Total population Haast southward in 2022, 250. Back where we're going, 2 to 3 dozen max. This is the era and location when an explorer began telling tales in the 1860s to his fellow boozers at an unprescribed Hokitika pub up the track. There was a unique flow of the river and ocean at this very confluence you are looking at that created a natural gold sluice and driving the gold to the surface on the beach at high tide. As you'd imagine, the pub emptied out pretty quickly that night. Pans were gathered, horses mounted, as well as wives, all for nout. But that's somewhat of a lightweight story compared to the tale of Frenchman's gold, and technically French men's gold, or even Australian convicts' gold, depending on which of those 2 stories you hear. Morphed versions are also regaled. Before you pour scorn early on in this number, doubtless you've heard of the Lost Dutchman gold mine in the States. Of course you have. Well, there are actually 4 versions of that, encompassing 2 locations, hundreds of miles from each other in another state. And also the main character in that tale was German and not Dutch. His name was Jacob Waltz. Geographic knowledge, of course, was never a strong point for Americans. 150 years later, 9,000 people per year go in search for the fabulous wealth he said he'd found. And now and again, they die trying, disappear altogether, likely down old gold mining shaft, following little more than Chinese whispers. Scoff not at New Zealand's owned lost treasure legend, and pioneering prospectors like this chap, Arawata Bill, the endurance and determination of which would put to shame most searchers today. Well, old Bill O'Leary dedicated his life to striking it rich. Now you know the context and the countryside. The first Kiwi story goes somewhat like this. When New Zealand was but a pup, a French barque lands at the Cascades in a storm. On board were mutineers. The vessel they'd flogged was swept onto the rocks. Owing to infighting, the surviving crew was down to either 2 or 5 in number. They landed on shore in a dinghy with a fortune of gold ingots, rescued from the sinking vessel. Now they had to take their chances in the bush, employ the dinghy, come lifeboat as best they can. This is the basic preliminary to the story, and then it diverges into the duo or quintet, looking at their options, given they were now in the back of beyond. Plus, all the stories you're going to hear, the weight of the actual gold becomes a factor. The threads indicate they opted to either head north to Nelson using the dinghy to get them part of the way, or march due east. Let's deal with the northerly option first. During this journey, one of their number became ill, and he was left at a Maori village to recuperate and take his chances there. As mentioned, it had become obvious the gold was proving too heavy to manhandle any distance and justify them losing their lives in the inhospitable circumstances they faced, so they hid it shortly after landing. The burial spot and details are given either as in a jackboot at the base of a marked tree, a cave, or simply dug into the ground. The moment they had arrived in Nelson, French authorities pounced and they were promptly extradited, not before drawing up a map. Or, in the other retelling, the motley survivors arrived up the coast at Greymouth to find a French bark from the same shipping company parked up. A mock trial ensued, and then they were hung on the spot. Some unprescribed time later, that bloke that was left with the Maori surfaced and integrated into the community in Greymouth or Westport, left a similar treasure map to his son. And then going off that base, we get into the inland stories. The crew attempted a beeline across the South Island to the French settlement of Arawata. One version is they were spotted hauling heavy packs here. Lake Wanaka Makarora region, only they found the going too hard and turned back. They headed north, where the story follows the same line. Now stick with me here, people. The time frame for the last stories was anywhere between 1830 and 1870, and the second version, which involves no Frenchmen at all, does follow the same script as the other one with an A and B plot. Starting with A, 3 Australian crims had flogged a reasonable craft in the 1890s and fled due east to the southern west coast. There they were in possession of stolen loot, you guessed it, gold. 3 boxes are mentioned, but the total is Morpheus. In the region of the Cascades, they arrived in a storm, and their mother vessel was in a sorry condition. On the run and not knowing exactly where they were forced to abandon the main vessel as it sank, only to lose one of their trio in the surf as they rowed to shore and safety. The remaining gold-laden twosome now decided to bury the gold where they were. One would go south and never be heard of again, and the other went north and lived to tell his tale, but only just. Starving and bedraggled, he survived only enough to issue an ending in befitting of a Hollywood movie and telling his tale on his deathbed. Now to be, that allegedly took place 20 years earlier and involves a whole boatload of thieving Australians, also on the run and being pursued from their homeland. Wanting to hide the loot before they pulled into civilization, they sent 2 of the cabal on shore to bury the evidence. Those 2 took their chance to double-cross their mates on the larger boat, and they went bush, gold and all. They waited a bit for their bros to sail over the horizon. Then it suddenly dawned to themselves, what now, and where the hell are we? The end of that tale is much the same as the last one. One went south, the other north, after hiding the gold in a cave. The chap who went deeper south into the woodland was never seen again. The other bloke who went north attracted the attention of a vessel travelling south, who took the bedraggled soul to Dunedin in a sorry state, where shortly after he too passed away, not before imparting the story of the gold, millions and millions just waiting to be found. The possessors of the map are said to have undertaken searches, some hush-hush, others less so, Because of the landscape and massive search areas, 2 large searches were undertaken at the end of the 18th century. One out of Dunedin, which based itself at Jackson's Bay, and that well-equipped and manned syndicate came up empty-handed. Several thousands of pounds were poured into a group from Southland based on the local tale about the survivors being spotted around Lake Wanaka, armed also with a treasure map from Nelson that was sold to the group, and they found not a speck of gold, although they did come across this fearsome creature. Millions of them. Then we have the search that was said to have happened straight after the Frenchman in Nelson had given his death rattle. That group came back empty-handed, mainly due to the aforementioned flying beasties driving them crazy, and terrible weather and infighting. On the plus side, they did give the story some credence. They said the map they had was accurate to a point. Disappointingly, the location of the Gold Festoon Cave appears to have been the victim of an earlier landslide, and they never went back for a second crack. Although one of the crew from that search, now in his 70s, passed on the details to an ex-soldier from Southland after World War I, and he went to the location but found it too hard going on his own, and he sought backing from others, which never came. During the long depression between 1885 and 1900, the West Coast region saw an influx of men just wanting to fill their bellies. The hard yakka of gold mining and forestry offered the opportunity to those that were physically capable to put food on the table. In those desperate times, some spun off to regions of the West Coast where deposits were sketchy and the transport cost to haul logs was marginal. During that period, there was renewed interest in the tale of a Frenchman's gold. Then, of course, there were prospectors like Arawata Bill that were 100% believers in the gold haul, as well as the lost ruby mine, a yarn which I'll leave for another day. Hera, as far as I can tell, publicised or known searches for the Frenchman's / Australian convicts' gold stash ended by 1920. That's where my research trail went cold. I'm sure, though, there are bound to be many additions to this tale that I never got a handle on. Be sure to take a look at the comments. This one has plenty of legs. Thanks for spending time here today. Thanks to those that pressed the subscribe button thingy. Bye for now.